Hi, welcome to the No Limits podcast. My name is Laura Jocelyn, and I'm the CEO of Ability Plus Therapy and the co-founder of No Limits Academy. Also, I am the co-founder of No Limits Method. And as this podcast goes on, you'll know what all three of those companies are and how they came to be. Roberta?
Hi, I am Roberta Nevis. I am a physical therapist, and I'm also the owner of Ability Plus Therapy, co-founder of No Limits Academy, and co-founder of No Limits Method.
So my story begins with the birth of my son in 1991 at 1 pound 3 ounces with a grade 4 bleed to the brain. Came to find out that Shane had spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. It was the hardest thing that I'd ever dealt with. As I decided to go forward and figure out what treatment methods and how to deal with what was happening to my husband and I, it was hard. There was no internet. There wasn't a book to find, all the answers that I needed. I was listening to the doctors and they were giving me little to no hope for his life and his outcome. They were telling me that the brain bleed would cause significant cognitive difficulties in his life, and the early birth and the lack of oxygen would create physical issues in his life, and that I may have no chance of having him have a typical childhood. And for that moment, it was like the world was on my shoulders. It was like I have now been giving a child that I have to negotiate life, my first child, in a completely different way. And how do you do that? I really wasn't sure where to start. I wasn't sure what I was being told, and then I was being shuffled off to like the medical of his life, his monitors, his feeding tube, his massive hematoma on his head, has SAP monitors for oxygen. I mean, I could go on and on. Heart monitors, nurses in my home, and a very little sleep. And I thought, is this what my life was going to be? And I was like, as I moved forward in that over the years, I realized that I got wrapped up in all of these like components of his life. Medical. I became his nurse. I became a caretaker. And the one thing that I realized that I kind of lost was the joy of being a mom. The joy of like who Shane was, right? Because I got wrapped up in everything else. And for me, I was like, okay, I've got to do all these things, but I also have to figure out he's a person. How do I get him to walk? How do I get him to crawl? How do I get him to speak to me? I didn't know what deficits I would have. And as I negotiated this journey, I realized that I was losing the component of Shane Jocelyn as a person. And that was where I had to turn to what do I want out of Shane's life instead of what everybody was telling me what Shane was going to be. So that switch for me was very big, and I realized that I needed to get the noise away and I needed to figure out who Shane was and where Shane was going to go. Fast forward 9 years later, my husband and I realized that there was a little boy in the Department of Children and Families that may need our help. It was a little boy that had spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy, and his name was Matt. And we already knew that we had the ability to help him through the company that we were starting. And we just felt that it was our duty. We weren't going to have any more children, but we felt it was our duty to maybe like help this child that's hard to adopt in systems that kind of look at them as not valued. So we adopted Matt at 3 years old, and he had some significant deficits. He was born low birth weight. He also had fetal alcohol syndrome, and he had drug addiction. So we knew that our hands were going to be full with, 2 children with cerebral palsy. But we knew that God would make the way, and he did. So now I'm going to give Roberta the opportunity to tell you how we met, and it was amazing.
So I have been a physical therapist for 23 years. When I went into college, I was really searching for a purpose and meaning in my life. And I started into business. I loved math, and I thought, okay, that's where I want to go. Well, it didn't take long for me to see that there was not going to be any fulfillment in that field for me and what I really felt was, important for me. And so just so happened my dad needed physical therapy. I went to physical therapy with him. And right then and there, I was like, okay, this is something that I think might be what I'm looking for. And so I started volunteering in different areas of physical therapy. And when I went into pediatrics, I fell in love with it. I knew right then and there, in my heart, that that's where I needed to do. And so, I've been a physical therapist now for 23 years. Early, from that point, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So when I finished college, I came back to Melbourne, and I was searching for areas where, I could work with pediatrics. And, they only had home health or the school system at the time. And so I ventured into home health, did that for a couple of years, but really the driving wasn't feasible for me. And so my only other option was the school system. And so I started, with that. And that's how I came to meet Laura, because I treated her son, Matt. So even though there were some things that I wasn't really happy in the school system, I knew that God put me there for a reason, and it was to meet her. So it's been
Absolutely
the most amazing blessing that I've ever had in my life, is to know this family and to now, to be working with her as a business partner.
Yeah. and to say that I didn't want to speak to school system therapist was because every time that I would speak to a school system therapist, it was always educationally relevant therapy, And so basically, I needed more from, he's in school for a lot of hours of the day, and I really needed more. And I felt that they should be able to do more. So I was more heavy starting Ability Plus therapy. I'd already started Ability Plus therapy before I met you. And then I needed more. So I liked the medical component of therapy. I realized that was how Shane or Matt were going to get to the place where they needed to be physically, and it also helps with their cognition. So as we found years later, as I was speaking to Roberta on the phone, I realized that she wasn't typical of all the other physical therapists that I'd talked to. And I said, well, hey, I'm starting this therapy company, and it's intensive pediatric physical therapy, and we were the second clinic in the country at the time to open, and I had people from all over the world coming, and I just knew she was different, right? I knew she got where I was going with my child because she was suggesting things that can be done in educationally relevant therapy, but most people don't think out of the box like that. So I invited her over. She started working for me during the summer for intensive therapy, which she loved.
Yeah, and that's really when I saw, because, as I mentioned, in the school system, I that was one of the components, like you mentioned, about the medical and the medical component in the educational setting. I feel like there shouldn't be a separation.
Yeah.
You have the educational setting, they're looking at children to succeed in school. Medically based therapy is for them to succeed in life. But children are they're spending most of their hours in school. So why is that not part of their life and really looking at the medical component?
Right.
But that's the part that was missing for me. And so having the opportunity to work for Laura and doing intensive therapy, and really, the intensive therapy is only 3 weeks long, and it's very intense, 4 hours a day. And so in a very short period of time, you're seeing all this progress. And so that's really when I saw, this is what I want to do. This is where really God wants me to be. And so for me, that was like answer to prayer.
Yeah. And so as I watched her work, I was even more impressed with you. So, and she was coming up with things, and I was like, okay, I need to ask her to be my business partner because I need that professional that believes the same thing that I believe that children can do and can succeed. And we just need to look at this completely different, right? And she's grown so much. She's NDT trained now, which I love because I like that neuro component, and I just saw that beautiful partnership coming together to make differences in not only my children's lives, but lots of children that have come through Ability Plus therapy. So as we continued this journey, I was also in a journey with the kids. I was negotiating both private, public school first, and then I put him into a private school. And I literally had to get professionals around me to adapt and change what they were doing to get him to where he needed to be. So I did the same thing with Matthew, but Matthew had more cognitive deficits. Matthew's processing was different. He had some learning disabilities, but they just all wanted to chalk it up to that he had a physical disability, which I knew was wrong. So 17 years ago, the journey started with us opening No Limits Academy. And to say that we didn't know what we were doing was an understatement.
We knew everything about therapy,
right,
but not education.
And I knew everything about what was wrong, and that's where you start solving any kind of problem, is to figure out what was wrong and then try to fix what needed to be fixed. And we saw it in the school system that I knew what the deficits were, and I knew where my children both needed to be, right? So as I did that, we took that information and then we literally worked on an actual method on how you educate, right? And that starts with just being able to communicate with a child, and how that communication evolves, right?
And not only that, but also, really incorporating therapeutic strategies into the classroom. And so with the knowledge and the skills that we have at Ability Plus Therapy, we were able to combine that very successfully.
Right. So at that point, I knew that if we didn't do this, no one was going to sit inside of a school system and innovate education itself, right? They're not going to change what they're doing. And we needed to be able to be that change maker. So opening that 17 years ago has changed many children's lives. We've had kids graduate with a regular diploma. We've had them communicate for the first time with their parents. We've unlocked what is happening in education, what is wrong, and we have successfully taught our teachers and created pathways for kids that now they can succeed.
This is actually the method that we created. What we implemented in No Limits Academy and what we developed is the No Limits method.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here to talk to you guys about the No Limits method.
Right. Because we want those changes to happen for your children.